All right. Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Presenting Data Effectively. My name is Courtney Brown, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the host and question moderator for today. Our presenter this morning is Patrick Bodily, Public Library Consultant and State Data Coordinator from the Idaho Commission for Libraries. So just a couple announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, please see the Continuing Education website. The session is about an hour, so you'll receive one LEU for this presentation. If you're watching an archived recording of this webinar, instructions on how to obtain your LEU are in the video's description on YouTube. So now I'll turn the presentation over to Patrick.
Morning, everyone. Can everyone else hear me? Typing is awesome. Thank you. So, like she said, I am Patrick Bodley. I am a consultant and the state data coordinator over in Idaho with the potatoes, not Iowa with the corn. But I was very excited and happy to come and talk about this. It's kind of it's one of my key points that I love is taking the data that everyone collects and then making it easily digestible and easy for people to understand. And so when Indiana reached out and said, hey, would you webinar this for us, I was more than happy to. The title for this, Presenting Data Effectively, was shamelessly stolen from a book by Stephanie Evergreen. If you all are able to track it down, read through it, she goes into much more depth than I will. But let's get going. And as we have questions, if there are questions, anything, feel free to raise your hand, feel free to type it in the chat box, and we will try to answer questions as we go instead of force you all to hold on to them and then forget what they really were at the end. But I do want you to know that, first of all, data visualization can be fun. You all have a story to tell, so let's have fun with telling that story. You all have data. I know that every public library that is attending this webinar today has yearly statistics on everything, and I know that because I know Angela Fox and Jen Clifton, and the fact that it is required that you submit them. So what we want to do is know how we can take the information that we have and make it eye-catching so that people will understand it. How we can go from something like this, when you have a spreadsheet and just hand people raw data, they're going to kill over. How can we go from something like that to something simple like this, or even this, or even something like this? These are all telling stories with your data. It's just a way of making the checks, the facts, easily digestible. So a good annual report. What we are talking about, just so that we're all on the same page, let's talk definitions, is that a good annual report is, I am not talking about a face-to-face presentation with this, and I'm not talking about either your annual report, annual survey that you submit to Angela. It is a brochure or a handout. Just for today, that's what we're going to talk about. Some sort of physical something that you will hand out to your key stakeholders, either the city council or your library board or the county commissioners. But on it, you want to include contact information for your library, for your board, for the director, what's in your collection, how many items you have, what formats they're in, what about programs or attendance at those programs. Also, as far as highlights go, what's awesome about you? What did you accomplish this last year? And also what's coming up. Do you have a building project? Did you get this awesome STEM grant that you want to brag about? Are you creating a team space? And again, you don't want to just vomit data at people. Let's make it easily digestible so that they can understand why you're excited, and try not to use that library jargon that we're all so used to using when we talk amongst one another. So there's a thing called the data visualization continuum, which is a big fancy way, but at one side of the continuum, you'll see that there's Excel charts or number art. Things, what I mean by those are things like the following. So this is number art. All it is this is as simple as it needs to be. You type up a document and you have a little box set aside for key highlights or callouts. This is data visualization, right? You could also create tables in Word or Google Docs or Excel or Sheets, whatever you're comfortable with. And then on the other side of the continuum, things can get a bit more complex. This is where story maps and infographics will come into play. Things like this from our friends in California, where this is actually a screenshot of a web page where actually as you hover the mouse over each individual county, it will also call out what libraries are available into the county. It's really awesome. It's also really, really technical. Or something like this. What I like about this one particularly, as we can see, the changing size of food, but across the bottom you also see that with those food sizes, the people are changing as well. And so it is telling the story that the CDC wants us to have, wants us to come across. So thinking back of that data visualization continuum, where are you? Because you're all somewhere. All that means is, where are you comfortable with creating things? And because we're at a wide array of locations, I'm sure, you don't need to be stressed out, right? All we need to remember is that, yes, data visualization can be fun. You can tell a story. You are the pro. You have the data. It's all of your information. It's just a way of sharing that information with people so that they can understand what it is that we're trying to tell them. So there's 5 tips for creating accessible data visualizations that we're going to go over, each of those 5. First, we're going to talk about using the tools that you have, putting the numbers in context, choosing the appropriate chart, simplifying and establishing a focal point, and of course not making people work too hard to find the information. So let's start with using the tools that you have. Just by either raise of hands in Adobe or through the chat box, how many of you have access to Word or Google Docs or Publisher? Okay, so I guess maybe I should have said who doesn't, right? Because everyone has access to something. But the key here is that you can use whatever it is that you have, whatever it is that you're comfortable with, to make a data visualization. They all have, especially they have templates that you can use, so you don't even have to start from scratch. So for example, when you open up a brand new presentation in Microsoft, there's this search for online templates or search for templates that are already there on your computer box. If you were to type in, for example, brochure, then all of these brochures will come up that you can just pick. And then for this example, the last time I did it, 29 different templates showed up, and more from other applications, more that were online that you could download as well. And then all you have to do is you can swap out the pictures with pictures of your library or pictures of stacks or whatever images you have available, change out the text. It's all done for you. So you don't have to do anything too hard. Same thing works. This is the Word example, but you can do the exact same thing in Google Docs. So if you were to click that Start a New Document, right there when you highlight and click on Template Gallery in Google Docs, it will give you all of these things, and you can scroll down to the Work section, and then also check out there's little headers at the top of each section that talk about personal or education, and they have a lot of different brochures or newsletters or things that you can highlight and localize and plagiarize for you. So use the tools that you have is our key point number 1. Use what you have. You don't have to go out and invest in some Adobe software. You don't have to go and do anything crazy like that. You're just more than able to use what you have. Our next tip was to put the numbers in context. Things are always easier to understand if you can make it local. So what do you have in your town, in your county, in your state that can help people understand? Something as simple as seating at the high school gym or the graduating class size. These are highlights from the last couple of annual reports that we publish and mail out, give to the legislators as well as each library in Idaho. So Albertsons is an Idaho started grocery store, so everyone knows it. Also, Idaho is large. There's 3 different state universities, one in the north, one in Boise, and one over in the southeast. And so we tried to pull out the football stadiums for each of those 3 libraries, or 3 sizes, 3 universities, excuse me. And then on the right-hand side there, collection size is easier to understand if you can do it. If you can figure out a per capita, I may not understand what 55,500,000, almost 600,000 items is, but I know that there's a lot of people here, and if everyone had 3.5 items, that's easier to digest, or that I could check out 10 items for every person in the state. It's easier to digest when you do it that way. So again, put those numbers into context so that people can understand what it is that we're trying to do. Tip number 3 is to choose the appropriate chart. The right chart for visualization and picking the right chart really is just understanding what story are you trying to tell and then using the appropriate graph or the appropriate chart. And it's not nearly as hard as it seems. I will tell you, however, pie charts are rarely the answer and 3D never is. And I am glad we're recording. I want to go on record saying that 3D is never the answer. So if anyone ever tells you it is, I will fight them. It will be great. But I'm going to go with that. But then the question is, what is the appropriate chart? Again, it depends on the story you're trying to tell. So if you're trying to use small numbers or show small numbers or percentages or frequencies, that's when you can use something as simple as a single number like we've seen earlier. This is where you could use a pie chart or a donut chart or a percentage donut. The difference between a pie chart and a donut chart, just so that we're all speaking the same language, is that that donut has the center missing. That's really all the difference is right there. So that's that. If you're trying to tell a story about time, something happening over time, attendance changing, number of programs held, then you would use a slope graph or a line graph or some stacked columns. Again, the difference between a line graph or a slope graph is that instead of being jagged edges that look like a mountaintop, you are rounding the edges. That's really all it is. It's those same things, just different fancy names. If you're trying to go through survey responses, you could use a bar or a column chart or what's called a lollipop graph, which again is just a bar chart that is a line with a circle on it instead of being a solid bar. So it's just a way of formatting it so it looks different and people think you're awesome. All of these charts are free and easy, and if you do have Excel or even Sheets from Google, then they are defaults. You can just click, hey, I want it to be done this way. A little more, we're also able to do comparisons. If we're doing comparisons, you could use this bar and a line chart or a bullet graph. What a bullet graph is, since we only have the one example up here, those pictures that you'll see of a bar chart that then has like an up or a down on the top or the bottom of it, it looks like it expanded. So it would be 40%, but maybe really up to 50 or a 60 or all the way down to 30. That's what we mean by a bullet chart right there. So, but this is the perfect way to do a comparison where you can do a bar chart for something and a line chart. I will say, if you're going to do a comparison, make sure that you're able to keep the left side, the key points, the same. You don't want to have different numbers and different axes that can skew the story you're trying to tell. If you're trying to show place, then you'll use either a heat map or a tile map. So you could see, for this example here, all of the NBA field goal attempts from 2006 to 2011, when the threes and dunks was really the highlight of what was going on over those years. And then sometimes it's complicated. If it's complicated, then all you need to do is tell the story of why it's complicated, right? So this is when you'll do a flow chart or a process map. Say you want to visualize for your staff the process that you go through for purchasing and cataloging and processing your materials to get them ready to check out. You can't just do a chart or a single number for that. That's a process. So you can just write out the process and help them understand, help people figure out. And again, line graphs, they're really, really great for comparison over time. So that's really what we're trying to do, is help people understand the story that it is you're trying to tell. Because again, you're the experts, this is your data, and so no one's going to, everyone wants to understand that's why they are caring, that's why they came to you. And so by giving them data that they can understand, this is, it just makes it easier on everyone, I guess. So tip number 4, we want to simplify and establish a focal point. This is super simple and easy to understand, right? No one has any questions on what's going on with this chart. That was perfect answer, George. That's just really what you do is, and that's what everyone else would do when they see this, is just, yep, and walk away and then just hope I keep talking. So we want to simplify and establish this focal point. So again, Stephanie Evergreen is amazing. This is from her book and then also her blog from stephanieevergreen.com. So this, what she does is she, every month, if you follow her blog or follow her on Twitter, she does some challenges. And this is one of the challenges that was taken. And so let's go over this chart together real quick. Feel free to type in the chat, but what are some problems that you see with this chart? And I'll give you some time to answer. So numbers are a mystery, 2 different kinds of charts, overlapping figures. It's super unclear, it's difficult to see the relationships. Not sure the claim of 1/3 of new clients. What is the year? What are you actually comparing? Yep, the line and bars aren't related enough together. Unlabeled y-axis, perfect. So I think you all have it. Some other things that I've noticed, just that I haven't seen pointed out yet, you'll notice in the title the external asterisk clients. Using an asterisk on a title is a huge red flag that there's too much going on in your graph. And so go ahead and just get rid of that. The stacked column also, so the type of chart that they chose, or the type of graph that they chose for those columns right there, makes it really hard to discern the different changes within each client type from quarter to quarter. So she's trying to show, or they were trying to show, hey, client 2 from Q1 of 2011 to Q1 of 2012, they changed, but you can't really tell because they've stacked. They've also, because I didn't see it, I also wanted to point out that that line total, the line graph, the cumulative total, color-wise, is also really, really similar to the color of the grid lines. And so it can be hard to pull out that way. Make sure that we're using our color choices appropriately so that it makes it easier. And so the very, very bottom, also that about 1/3 of our clients are new. That is the key point in my mind. That's what they're wanting to tell. And so it's just kind of buried at the bottom. You don't get to the key point until the very, very end of trying to figure out what it is that you're looking at. And so what she did and what people suggested is they called out, they simplified the graph, and they made it easier. So first, they split the graph to tell both stories you want to tell, only comparing last year to this year instead of quarter to quarter. So instead of having each quarter pulled out, you can see now gray is 2011 and orange is 2012, the story they were trying to tell. The title of the graph lets the reader know exactly what it is that you're trying to get across. They labeled the sets of columns directly, so there's no need for a legend anymore. The color that they chose, orange, orange is a color that draws the eye, so it's easier to, it just is more visually appealing. And simplifying it means you can simplifying your graph means you can increase the font size and it's easier for people to read now. So that is what we're talking about when we mean that we want to simplify and establish a focal point so that people know exactly the story that you're trying to get across. You have clear title, clear labels, your X and Y axis are labeled if that's the kind of chart that you're doing, just so people know exactly what it is that you're trying to tell. And then tip number 5, don't make people work too hard to find the information. Sometimes it can be just as simple as adding a data label to your graph so that people know exactly what it is that they're seeing, so people know exactly what it is that they're trying to understand. Again, going from this to this makes a world of difference, and it wasn't a hard thing to do at all. It just makes your data that much easier to understand. So again, we're going to do just a quick 5 minutes. I'll keep an eye on time. But let's look at some charts and see what it is that we like and what we don't like. What can we change? What should we change? Is there a better way to display the data and tell our story? So the following charts that we're going to use were from RIPL, the Research Institute for Public Libraries. So if you were there, then you already have a leg up. And if you weren't, then we get to work through it together. But what is it about this that we need to change, that we can change? Again, in the chat box, let me know what it is that you think. Tammy, you're my favorite. Pie. And it doesn't add up to 100. It's 238%. So just if you're keeping track there. Angela has a really good point that the numbers are too small and don't have enough contrast. And Kim talks about putting the names of the categories in the colored spaces, which is, in my mind, another way of saying that you and I are trying to bounce back and forth between the key and the chart to see what exactly it is. Oh, perfect. We're using that library jargon and doesn't explain what a pack is, right? And I just do want to point out that I'm ignoring Jen, so we're good there. But what if it was changed to something like this? We tell the story we want to tell. Using technology to stay in touch with family and friends and maintain social networks was the most popular activity on Rock Creek Public Library computers. So you use your title to let people know the point that you're trying to get across. And some people, again, we're going to be using those computers for more than one thing, right? It's not like I only come to the library and only look up government resources or only do school. Everyone's going to be doing multiple different things, so they could have answered more than one thing, right? And so because of that, we want to remember on the left side, always start our graphs at 0%, And then it helps false readings. And the main point we're trying to get across, that 51%, that's why we called that out with a different color, right? That's our highlight. That's what we want people to see, using technology to stay in touch with family and friends. So it makes, thank you, Tammy, makes it so much more sense for people that are trying to understand. So same thing, only different. What do we like? What don't we like about this one? So the percents are on the line. Should be a bar graph, at least, since there's no timeline. It's too busy. Definitely don't need the decimals. Yep, that call out to the side, the series one. What is that? Tammy saying, where do my eyes need to go first? Yep, we can get rid of all those decimals right there. And there's no, yes, again, so the wrong graph was chosen because it doesn't need to be a line. It's not a series over time, right? It's a bunch of different things that are or are not related. So isn't this a better way to tell the story? Don't you think this would be better if you're trying to let people that your computers are being used for work related, receiving a skill and doing work for training and looking for a job are all skills. They're all reasons that your library is being used, but you can see over time, or can see the highlights that have happened, how it's increasing over time there. So again, what story is it that you're trying to tell? What do you want people to understand about the library? All right, our next one. This one's for Angela because we want 3D. Oh, I'm sorry, Jen. That's right. Catherine brings out a really great point. You can't tell what the percentages actually are. So if you were to look at that and say, okay, what percent, for example, of our patrons are identify as Hispanic or Latino, what is that percent? And you can't tell. And why is the title on the side? I I don't know if I'm the only one, but I actually cock my head to the side to try and read that. Yep, Tammy. Perfect. Yeah, Sonia also points out some problematic language that's being used. Okay, so ordering, if I'm understanding Karen better, ordering the blocks, since it doesn't need to be alphabetical, you're trying to tell a story. Um, and Kate will just pretend, since this is a pretend library, that they sent out a survey to people that were using computers. But again, I'm not 100% sure since this was totally made up by Ripple. But again, let's look at the story that we're trying to tell. What story are you trying to tell? So if you're trying to say, hey, half of the Boulder Bay Public Library users are white and more than 1 in 4 are Hispanic or Latino, then you can call those out that way. Or We could even change this how to say self-identify as white or Hispanic or Latino, whatever it is, so we're doing those things. And again, we could assume that this is going to be part of a patron use survey that the libraries were using out there. But this is infinitely easier to read than this thing right here. All right, this would also be an acceptable thing by calling out the Hispanic or Latino, pointing to the number of the specific group you're trying to provide access to. If that is what you're trying to do, call out what it is that you're trying to call out. All right, our last one. What about this one? So George is saying add some data labels so we can see what exactly each thing is. Catherine, same thing, hard time looking up and down. Search engine and library printers are not activities. Order from least to most. Kim, am I right in thinking that you mean the bars themselves are too far apart? Okay. Autumn points out, shouldn't that equal 100% since it's overall activities? And see, that's what our problem right there. So I'm going to say the part of the problem is that we don't know what in the world the title means for sure. It's not very clear. And you are right, it's not too bad. Compared to some of the others, this is one of the easier to digest, but there's just some things we could fix. We could group some things together. Yep. And again, some people do all the things in a single session, and we need to point out how the data was collected. So it looks like they were listening to our chat preemptively into the future and took all of our things. They reordered it. They went largest to smallest instead of smallest to largest. Changed the title so that they could highlight what it is that they're talking about, the most common web-based tool used by public pond library patrons for search engines. And then put the data labels on the top. They called out the one that they wanted. And so it's just, it can be just that simple. Again, we'd want to point out either on this or somewhere else in the document how the data was collected, whether this was a survey, whether it was the librarian looking over everyone's shoulders, whether we had tracking software, whatever it was. Hopefully for privacy issues, they're just self-identifying what it is they're using, obviously. But if we're making things a little bit clearer for people, getting rid of the grid lines because they're not needed anymore, calling out the title, those are the main things that we want to do right there. So let's take this and put it all together. You do have data, you want to make it accessible. The way your information is arranged is important. It doesn't matter if you're working with text, with images, with graphics. Without a thoughtful, well-composed layout, your work's going to basically fall apart. So for today, for the rest of the time we have, we want to talk about 5 basic principles of graphic design. And those are proximity, white space, alignment, contrast, and repetition. So proximity is all about using visual space to show relationships in your content. In practice, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is make sure that related items are grouped together, and groups that are not related should be separated to visually emphasize their lack of relationship. All in all, this is going to make your work easier to understand at a glance, whether it's 100% text or something a little bit more visual. For example, you look at this and you say, okay, name and title, that's larger, different font, pulled off to the side. Icons kind of let you know what it is. Let's pull them off to the side one way. And then contact information all together, same font size, same type, all there. That's all that we mean by proximity, is grouping similar things together. White space is an important part of every composition. Now, again, this doesn't mean literal white space. It just means negative space, like the spaces between your content, between lines, and even the outer margins. There's no one way to use white space correctly, but it is good to understand its purpose. So if you were going to email me or talk to someone else and say, hey, am I doing this right? There isn't a right way. It's just to understand the reasons behind it. So white space helps you define and separate sections, and it gives your content room to breathe. If your work ever starts to feel cluttered or uncomfortable, a little white space might be just what the doctor ordered there. So again, on this one, logo, motto, or whatever they're calling that, and then contact information all together, but with white space separating the different sections. Alignment is something that you deal with all the time, even if you don't realize it. Whenever you type an email or create a document, your text is aligned automatically. When aligning objects by yourself, for example, images or separate text boxes, getting it right can be tricky, but the most important thing is to be consistent. It might help to imagine, like this here, your content arranged inside of a grid, or there, if you use Publisher, for example, or different parts of the Office suite, you're able to add grid lines so that you can see if things are snapping. Same with PowerPoint. You can use PowerPoint to create data visualization as well. But notice how there's an invisible line centering each image to the text, and each grouping I've also evenly spaced and aligned with equal sized margins. It's this attention to detail that makes the composition easier to navigate. And without consistent alignment, it could, again, your work start to feel disorganized. Contrast. What we mean by contrast, at least for today, it simply means that one item on your thing, on your publication, is different from another. In layout and composition, contrast can help you do many things like catch the reader's eye, create emphasis, or call attention to something important. To create contrast, you can use color, you can use more than one style of text, you can use different sizes and objects of different sizes. This makes the design more dynamic and therefore more effective at communicating its message. You look at this and you know right away it's a save the date for Corey and Anthony, because they either used different font or they had the larger font for Corey and Anthony. And then you also want to work on repetition. Repetition is a reminder that every project should have a consistent look and feel. And so this means finding ways to reinforce your design by repeating or echoing certain elements. So, for example, Emily's PowerPoint presentation that she's got right here, if you have a specific color palette like she's chosen, look for ways to carry that color palette through. If you've chosen a special header style, you want to use that header every time that you're doing something. And it's not just for aesthetic reasons. Being consistent can also make your work easier to read. When viewers know what to expect, then they can relax and focus on the content. So let's just remember, first of all, KISS. Keep it simple. We'll go with sweetheart today. But we want to keep it simple. One graph, one message. These are simple. All they are highlights of what it is that the library wants people to tell. The number of library visits, that's a call out, right? English as a second language, that's a call out. You are telling the story, you're keeping it simple, and you're helping people understand what it is exactly that they want to use right there. And then on that right hand side there, $180, picture of lemonade. It's just telling how a story about Helen Stone and what this first grader did. You were telling a story, you're localizing it, you're making it small numbers for people and helping them connect with the data that the story that you're trying to tell them. Our second one, show rather than tell. If there is ever a time that you can point out a place or show someone rather than just give them numbers, it is so much easier for them to understand. You can do that by using a map, like we've got called out here. I'm sorry, I don't have a map of all the Indiana libraries. Maybe we can do that next time. Or you show that 1 in 5 adults is not online, or you show a giant 6 million so that people can see the total number. You are showing them what it is that you want them to understand. And last of all, colors and fonts. Be consistent. Carry them through. If you don't know where to start, there is an awesome Google Chrome and actually Firefox, but there's an extension called Palette Tab that I just typed into the chat box so everyone can look for it. What it does is that every time you open up a new tab, it will give you a pre-designed palette, 5 different colors that go well together, along with their color codes, so that you can just click on it, copy and paste and add that code into whatever software you're using to pick that color, and 5 different fonts that are free to download off of Google Fonts. It changes with every new tab, or at the very bottom there's like a refresh button so that you can just sit there and stare or find something that works together. And also keep in mind that if your library does have specific branding guidelines, you should be following those or get permission to stray from those guidelines if it is that you're going to, if that's what it is that you're going to do. So with colors and fonts specifically though, stay consistent and carry them through your entire presentation. With that, the contact information didn't carry over. Great. But what questions do you all have?
While we're waiting for questions to come in, just a reminder to get your LEU, do stay on the presentation. I will change over to that LEU pod here in a bit, but go ahead and type those questions for Patrick into the chat box. And Patrick, when we change over to that pod, it does have your contact information there. So hang on for that as well. If you are watching a recorded archived version of this webinar, your information about how to get your LEU is going to be in the video's description in YouTube. And Patrick and I will hang out here and take a look at the chat box for a few minutes here. So if you have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat box now. So we have someone that was asking the name of the book by Stephanie Evergreen.
It's called Presenting Data Effectively.
Oh, we have someone from Maine. Thanks for joining us.
Autumn, yeah, you're correct. So if you are one of the people that uses Canva, they also have graphs that you can edit. I didn't call them out specifically, but if you do have a Canva account, they're awesome at helping people create presentations.
And just a little plug for us, we did do a graphic design for librarians series, and one of those was using Canva, and it is available on our archived webinar page. I will put that in the chat box, the URL for that. Give me just a second. There's a great question from Catherine. Are there any library reports specifically that you think have great examples of infographics and charts?
Yes, and let me find the link for it. So I did a presentation at the Association for Rural and Small Libraries, but I am trying to remember what year. Anyway, as part of that presentation on their website, I had a few different brochures that libraries had come up with and put out, everything from just a single one-page flyer to a multi-page booklet. Let me find the link to that presentation. I'll put it in the chat, and then you can see some of those that way.
While he's looking for that, I did put the link into the chat box of our continuing ed site with our archive trainings. There is a Canva presentation there. And then Jen Clifton says, if you like this kind of presentation, she recommends Ripple, which will be in Illinois this summer. And she has a link there for that. So while more questions are coming in, I am going to go ahead and change over to the LEU pod. So your LEU for this presentation is there at the top. You'll want to highlight the name, which is LEU certificate, and then download the file. And then about in the middle of the page, there's a survey link. If you could select that and fill out the survey, I'll be sharing that information with Patrick. And then Patrick's email address is there at the bottom, as well as mine, if you have any questions. And it looks like we have some more. Oh, Patrick put in the URL for the ARSL presentation.
Yep, so that one was from 2017. If you either just search for Bodily or it's about halfway down. But the presentation was called It's Not Bragging If It's True. And there's handouts from Jefferson Davis County in Texas, Lyons Public Library in Oregon, Nampa Public Library in Idaho, North Liberty in Iowa, and I always butchered their name, but Powhatan County in Virginia, that were really, really well done. And they're there. You can just download those PDFs.
Let's see, Tammy says she prefers Adobe Spark to Canva. Not use that one.
And that's totally fine.
Are there any diversity audit reports with different features, graphs that you may recommend as examples? This presentation has been helpful to me.
Nothing is coming straight to mind, but let me think on that. And if something does, then I will. Can I just send it to you, Courtney, to pass out to everyone?
Absolutely, yes, we can do that.
Okay.
And then Nicole put a blog that she's found useful, the link there in the chat box as well.
Oh, nice.
All right. If you have any more questions, be sure to put those in the chat box. Just a reminder, we did record this presentation. I will send this out to everyone who attended. If you are watching this presentation online after the fact, information on how to get your LEU is in the description in YouTube. When I send out the recording to all the attendees, I'll also send out the presentation slides, and then if there's any other information that Patrick would like to share, I will send that out as well in the next week. Otherwise, we'll stay on for a few more minutes. If you have any questions, be sure to put those in the chat box. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you.